The world thought America's war in Afghanistan ended in 2014, but it didn't. In the shadows of the Hindu Kush, a secret mission began, a silent battle fought by those who refused to let the flame of freedom die. This is the untold story of Operation Freedom Sentinel.
When the sun rose over the mountains of Afghanistan in 2015, a new chapter of America's longest war quietly began. The world believed it was over, that after more than a decade of conflict, the United States had finally closed the book on its mission in Afghanistan. But the truth was far more complicated. Beneath the surface, a new operation had taken shape, smaller, quieter, and far more complex. It was called Operation Freedom Sentinel. This wasn't a war of grand headlines or sweeping offensives. It was a mission fought in the shadows, through intelligence networks, drone operations, and elite special forces working side by side with Afghan allies who were trying to keep their fragile country from collapsing. It was the United States' final attempt to stabilize Afghanistan before the storm that everyone feared would one day come. On December 28, 2014, NATO formally ended its combat mission in Afghanistan. The operation known as Enduring Freedom, launched in the aftermath of 9/11, came to a ceremonial close. American officials stood before cameras and announced that major combat operations had ended. Afghanistan's future, they said, would now rest in the hands of its own security forces. But behind the speeches and flag ceremonies, American commanders knew the truth. The fight was far from finished. The Taliban had not been defeated. Al-Qaeda still hid in mountain valleys, and a new, more ruthless enemy was beginning to emerge, the Islamic State, expanding its reach into South Asia. The danger of Afghanistan once again becoming a safe haven for terrorists was real. So even as one mission ended, another quietly began. On January 1, 2015, Operation Freedom Sentinel was launched with two primary goals: continue counterterrorism operations against the remaining extremist groups and support the new NATO-led mission known as Resolute support, which aimed to train and assist Afghan forces. The war was changing form. No longer about massive troop deployments or nationwide offensives, this new mission focused on precision and intelligence. The United States would target specific threats: terrorist leaders, extremist networks, and anyone planning attacks against the West. Troop levels dropped dramatically, from over 100,000 during the surge years to around 10,000. But those who remained were specialists: Green Berets, Navy SEALs, intelligence operatives, and air crews who knew that this quieter war might be just as dangerous as the one before. In dusty outposts and mountain bases, small American teams worked alongside Afghan commandos. They trained, advised, and fought together, often far from the public eye. Their goal wasn't victory, it was stability. Keep the Taliban contained, disrupt terrorist operations, give the Afghan government enough breathing room to stand on its own. And for a while, that strategy seemed to hold. Between 2015 and 2016, U.S. forces launched targeted strikes against al-Qaeda leaders in places like Kunar and Nangarhar provinces. Afghan troops grew in number and confidence, slowly taking over more of their country's defense. But progress came at a heavy cost. The Taliban, though weakened, remained relentless. Villages would fall and be retaken, sometimes in the same week. Roadside bombs haunted supply routes. The Afghan people, tired of endless conflict, hoped that this time the peace might finally hold. But corruption, infighting, and political gridlock undermined nearly every gain. Then came a new and terrifying player: ISIS-K, the so-called Khorasan branch of the Islamic State. Emerging from the chaos, they brought with them a brutal ideology and a campaign of terror that targeted not just soldiers, but civilians, bombing mosques, schools, and hospitals. The mission of Operation Freedom Sentinel became more complex with every passing month. U.S. forces were no longer fighting one clear enemy. They were now battling multiple threats, each with its own agenda, but all determined to destabilize Afghanistan. While the world's focus shifted elsewhere to the rise of ISIS in Iraq and Syria, a quiet, relentless campaign continued in Afghanistan. Drones circled high above the mountains, hunting insurgent leaders. In 2016, one of those strikes killed Mullah Akhtar Mansour, the Taliban's leader in Pakistan. It was a message. The United States might have reduced its presence, but its reach was still global. Yet every drone strike also carried political risk. Afghan civilians feared for their safety, and leaders in Kabul struggled to maintain control amid growing public frustration. For the Afghan soldiers on the front lines, Operation Freedom's Sentinel was a test of endurance. Many fought with limited pay, outdated weapons, and scarce ammunition, yet they continued to defend checkpoints, patrol villages, and face ambushes daily. For American troops, this new phase of the war felt strangely invisible. There were no large battles to define success, no decisive victories to announce. It was a quiet war, one fought with patience, discipline, and the constant uncertainty of what the next day might bring. As the years went on, the political winds shifted. In 2017, a new administration in Washington loosened the restrictions on U.S. military operations. Airstrikes increased dramatically. American pilots once again filled the Afghan skies, supporting local troops and striking Taliban positions. The goal had changed, not simply to maintain the balance, but to pressure the Taliban into peace talks. Cities like Kabul, Kandahar, and Herat became fortified zones guarded day and night, while the countryside burned with fighting. By 2018, peace talks began in Doha, Qatar. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, U.S. diplomats sat across from Taliban representatives. The world watched with cautious optimism. After all the years of fighting, perhaps diplomacy would finally succeed where war had failed. The Doha negotiations stretched on, filled with tension and mistrust. But in 2020, a deal was finally announced. The U.S. would withdraw its remaining troops, and in return, the Taliban promised not to harbor terrorist groups or attack Western forces. On paper, it was a step toward peace. On the ground, violence continued. The Taliban kept advancing. Afghan troops kept dying, and for many, the deal felt like a slow countdown to something inevitable. As the U.S. withdrawal accelerated in 2021, Operation Freedom's Sentinel entered its final phase. American forces shrank to a skeleton crew, a few hundred troops guarding the embassy, supporting counterterrorism missions, and helping Afghan commandos when possible. The Afghan government, left increasingly on its own, struggled to hold territory. Districts fell one after another as the Taliban launched a lightning offensive across the country. By mid-2021, it was clear the Afghan state was collapsing. Provincial capitals fell without resistance. Soldiers abandoned posts, unsure who to fight for. In August, the world watched as the Taliban entered Kabul, not through battle but through the quiet surrender of a broken system. The Afghan president fled. The military dissolved. And just like that, 20 years of effort unraveled in a matter of days. At Kabul's airport, chaos unfolded. Thousands of Afghans crowded the runways, desperate for a flight out. American and Allied troops scrambled to organize one of the largest air evacuations in history. As the final C-17 aircraft lifted into the night sky on August 30, 2021, the mission officially ended. Operation Freedom's Sentinel, America's last chapter in Afghanistan, was over.
Keep that vehicle
It had
moving
lasted
steady.
6.5 years, spanning 3 U.S. presidents,
right,
countless
secure the straps. Let's
missions,
get this ramp
and a
closed.
shifting landscape of hope and loss. For some, it was a necessary bridge between combat and peace. For others, it was a slow-motion failure, an operation that prolonged what could not be fixed. But for those who served, it was something simpler and deeper. It was duty. There were moments of courage that will never make headlines. A medic saving a wounded Afghan soldier under fire, a drone operator tracking a target for days in silence, a translator risking everything to help foreign troops. Operation Freedom's Sentinel was not a story of victory or defeat. It was a story of endurance, of people who kept going long after the world stopped watching. When the war finally ended, many asked, what was it all for? The answer isn't simple. Operation Freedom's Sentinel didn't win the war, but it prevented something worse for a time. It trained thousands of Afghan soldiers. It disrupted terrorist networks. It gave a generation of Afghans a glimpse of education, opportunity and hope, however brief it was, and yet the images of August 2021 still linger. Planes taking off into the dark, leaving behind a nation uncertain of its future. Those images marked the end of an era, not just for Afghanistan, but for America's role in the world. The longest war in US history had ended not with celebration, but with reflection, a reminder that even the mightiest power cannot shape a nation's destiny from afar. For the Afghan people, the years of Operation Freedom's Sentinel were filled with both progress and pain. Schools opened, cities modernized, and young women began to dream of futures their mothers couldn't have imagined. But those dreams now live under new realities. War doesn't always end with a peace treaty or a parade. Sometimes it ends quietly, in a single night with the hum of engines and the fading echo of a departing aircraft. That is how Operation Freedom's Sentinel ended. A quiet conclusion to a long and costly chapter. Even today its legacy continues, in the stories of soldiers who served, in the lives saved and lost, and in the lessons it left behind. That freedom once fought for is never easily kept. That peace built on fragile ground can crumble overnight.